Hello and welcome to My Living Room. I'm Kathleen Hershner. A couple of years ago, in the first season of My Living Room, I interviewed a woman that was so intriguing to me that I later invited her to come to do another interview with me on my radio program on Vaughn Radio. And so when I was thinking about people I wanted to interview for this season, I went through my list of my former guests, and her name just jumped out at me, and I was like, yes, I remember that woman. Mainly because I liked her, but also because her name is so unusual. Vivienne Sarobe.
That's right.
Welcome back to My Living Room.
It's very nice to be here, Kath.
It's great to see you again.
I enjoyed myself so much. I was very happy to be invited back.
You were an excellent guest.
Thank you.
Sarobe, I remember liking that name when I first met you. I was like, what is that name? Is it Spanish? Is it?
It is. It's from Navarra, the north of Spain.
Is it common?
It's not very common. It's quite unusual. My second surname, as you know, in Spain we use two of them.
Yes.
And my second surname is Sopranis, which is also very unusual. Yeah. So I always get the, excuse me?
Well, Sarobe doesn't seem like a Spanish surname to me. It could be from anywhere.
Yeah, that's right.
It could be, and you are kind of a woman of the world as well.
Sort of. Yeah. Been around.
If I remember correctly, you are partly South African.
Sort of. I grew up in South Africa.
Yeah.
My parents are both Spanish. They met at English lessons for foreigners in England.
That's right.
And we lived in England until I was 5, then we moved to South Africa. And I stayed there until I was 10, then I came back to Spain, spent a year in Switzerland, but in between we lived in Portugal, in Wales, all sorts of places. And so we changed a lot. We moved around quite a bit.
Was it because of your dad's work?
Exactly, that's right. You see, my father is from Galicia and my mother's from Tenerife, and these are people who don't think about traveling twice, they just move. I was quite impressed to see that. Yeah, you know.
I can believe it with the Tenerife people, island mentality, like we got to get off the island.
They're very brave, you know. They're very brave. If you think what it costs to pick up and move, it's all the different places and faces and languages, and I think they've been very brave people, and it's given us a tremendous cultural baggage, which I'm very grateful for.
Yeah, it's baggage in the good aspect of the word.
Yes, I think in both, because you have changing cultures is one of those things that is very stressful to most people. It is stressful. That's my job too, you know.
And we're going to talk about that.
Good.
Well, no, I mean, I'm thinking about how fortunate you were as well to have parents who had, you know, the nerve to pick up and move to another country, and the fact that you grew up in South Africa. You have this beautiful, what I guess would be a South African English accent.
I have a slight South African accent. If I'm hanging around South Africans, I'll go totally South African and start talking like that.
That's how they sound?
That's so South African, and it just moves. But usually my accent is sort of a neutral English.
Yeah, I would say so. But I do remember enjoying listening to you speak, especially on the radio. On the radio, you can focus more on how someone sounds. And I would sit there with my Cascos on. I was thinking, Vivienne has such a nice voice.
Oh, that's so nice of you. Thanks.
Well, you're able to use your voice and your sort of warm way of being in your work because you do many things, but one of them is to work as a psychologist.
That's my main occupation right now, yes. I work as a psychotherapist, and it really comes in handy to have lived in different countries and learned different languages, because one of the amazing things I didn't realize until I was about 12, there are concepts that don't exist in different languages. I found out, yes, salero, Spanish salero, which is sort of, that's what you say for flamenco dancers. They have a grace and a something that's special. That word doesn't exist in English. And there are loads of other concepts that are also very common in the English language. For instance, psychologically speaking, we talk about what your comfort zone is as if it were a normal description.
Especially in California.
Exist. Yeah, that's so hippie and new age and everything. Yeah. It's a very useful idea. And it's not common in Spanish. So you're really lucky if you speak several languages, because you get to hear a whole load of complex ideas that are matter of fact in that language, but they're not that common in your culture, maybe.
So there's no, like, zona de confort?
No. No.
So not only do the word or the expression, does the word or expression not exist, but the concept of something being outside of your little box, your little comfort zone.
Exactly, the comfort zone, which would be what you feel comfortable doing, and that's part of your routine, your everyday, and what you're used to. But in Spanish, you have to say all those words to say comfort zone.
That's so funny.
And it's incredibly useful in psychotherapy because, for instance, if you want to work with somebody and talk about how they can improve their self-esteem or how they can feel better and not have so many panic attacks, for instance, they obviously have to make their comfort zone much larger and expose themselves to unknown things. But the concept doesn't exist in Spanish. So we have to explain the whole idea. And but it's really nice.
And when you explain this notion of comfort zone and to a Spaniard in Spanish, we need to expand your area of comfort so that things don't upset you anymore or as much. I guess in the United States they call it aversion therapy, where like I think they expose you to the very thing that you're afraid of.
That can happen in some specific situations. It's useful,
like
but
fear of
in
flying,
general,
maybe.
Yeah, well, but you have to do two things there. You have to relax the responses to stress and expose the person to the situation. And there's another way of doing it, which is you get them into the worst possible situation, and then they realize they're not going to die, and they survive it.
Sounds horrible. I don't want to do this kind of therapy.
I don't do that sort of thing. I don't do that sort of thing.
I'm not going. She's going to scare me.
No.
Well, but we spoke briefly before coming on the air about your work in helping people deal with cultural issues, like not cultural issues, but with, how did you say it?
I suppose the tremendous impact of another culture. And you know where it's incredibly important? In marriages. When you are married to somebody from another culture, and suddenly you find yourself doing something that you find is perfectly logical, and they feel terribly offended, and you, well, what's going on? Everybody does this, and you realize not everybody does that. On the other hand, cultural differences have sometimes been the best excuse for marriages to work really well. And I know a couple, he's English and she's Spanish, and they have this very funny expression, es que es guiri. He's a foreigner.
Yeah. It's so, because he's a guiri.
She puts it into that little cupboard, and anything goes in there. So they're incredibly tolerant with each other. They attribute any differences or anything that could have become an argument to their cultural differences, which is fabulous.
Well, it is. As you were talking about it, I was sort of thinking about relationships I've had with men who have been either Spanish or from other countries. And you're right, there are challenges to it, but I think that the benefit is greater than the drawback, because a lot of the things that might bother me with a person from my own country in a relationship with a man who's American, I sort of let go. I let it go with foreign. I'm like, oh, well, you know, they're Spanish and different way of approaching something.
Yeah, you can do that.
So we talked the last time I interviewed you a lot about your background and learning how to become a therapist. And I don't suppose that we need to revisit that, because the work that you're doing right now is probably much more something you want to talk about.
I'm having a great time right now, yes.
And you're working in Madrid?
I work in Madrid. I have my own practice, which is very comfortable because it allows me to see people for as long as they need to be seen. There is not an institution limiting the time we see each other.
I mean, you can see each other for as long as you want, like not only just in the session, but for years and years, or?
Well, sometimes this is the way a patient put it. I'm fine now, but I come to see you because it makes me a better person. I found it so funny.
Oh, that's so
It was very moving.
That's very flattering.
It was very, very beautiful, because it's not about curing. I don't think I've cured a person in my whole life. I help people see what their alternatives are and know themselves as well as possible. And try to reach their goals and try to release their talents and let them flow. I'm very interested in helping people be what they can be, reach their potential, without pushing them too much.
Maybe cure isn't the thing, the objective.
I don't think it's, well, there are some things that are incredibly uncomfortable. For instance, if somebody has panic attacks, for instance, which is very common nowadays, because there's a lot of pressure on people, and you don't have the structures that made you feel very safe in other cultural contexts. If you're living in a big city and you're quite isolated and you're always on show, practically always on show, you have to perform. There are lots of competitors, and some things become incredibly overwhelming. Either practical things or emotional things, or creativity becomes incredibly pushy, and you have to create more and more and more. you can have panic attacks and you can break down and you can feel shattered and terrified about the silliest thing, having to decide, for instance, now I have workmen in my house. I have to decide between the green floor and the brown floor. And I'm sort of going, did I choose right? Did I choose right?
So you're second guessing your decision.
I'm second guessing my decisions.
And a panic attack, I suppose, maybe comes from external pressures, and then you just can't deal with it internally.
It can be that way. It can be that way.
Isn't it funny too, Vivienne, how when you live in another country, because you've lived in many different countries, how things bother you or you get upset about things that in your own country you don't even think about.
Exactly.
Like I get annoyed, for instance, in Madrid with the lights. I've talked about this many times on the radio. I don't like the fact that when you cross the street, there are two sets of lights, traffic lights. So one will be green and one will be red.
Yes.
And in my country, you walk across the street when the light's green. Here, you have to watch both lights. You know what I'm talking about? Like there's, you know how some of the streets are split in two?
Yes.
When you're crossing the street?
Okay.
And there are two sets of lights?
There are two sets of lights,
yeah,
okay.
And they don't necessarily turn green
at the same time.
At the same time.
Yes.
So, like, this is not a big deal, right? This is people get used to this. But when I first moved here, that would actually irritate me, and I'd be really angry.
But you see, all the cultural innuendos add up.
Yeah.
The cut of meat is totally different in different countries. If you go to your butcher and ask for this or that, even if you translate perfectly, you don't get the same cut because they cut meat differently in different cultures. Yeah. The spices are different. The traffic lights are different. All bureaucracy is totally different.
Definitely.
How doctors address you or don't. You know, these are the very basics of life, and it can become terrible. It can become really frightening if you've come from a situation where you were already a bit stressed or just adapting to the new country. It's really hard sometimes.
In your practice here in Madrid, do you work mainly with foreigners, with guiris?
I work a lot with foreigners because they can't find too many English-speaking therapists. So I'm lucky to be able to talk English and French. So I do speak English, Spanish, French with all sorts of people with those languages. I also work with lots of Spaniards, and I used to work in the public system in Spain and trained with the English public system teachers. So I'm exposed to all of these cultures and languages, and it's very useful. And then the English and Spanish public system are now very full of foreigners from other countries that are not English or Spanish-speaking countries, or
like
French-speaking.
Eastern Europe or...
Eastern Europeans or people from different countries in the Middle East, in Africa, in America, in all sorts of places. And it's very interesting, it's very enriching.
Well, I remember the last time we spoke, you were, and I was supposed to come to one of these events. You do something at El Corte Inglés.
That's right.
And I remember after you were on TV with me, I was like, oh, I'm definitely coming, I'm definitely coming. And you sent me a couple of emails. I never went, though. It was, it refreshed my memory on what that was. It was like a meeting or something that you had.
Well, Corte Inglés has this group called Ámbito Cultural, which is mainly there to divulge culture. And they have a philosopher, and they have the psychologist, who is me. They have lots of people presenting books, and I happened to write a novel, and they presented my novel there. That was very nice of them. And then they invited me to do these talks for Corte Inglés, Ámbito Cultural. And this is my 5th year at Corte Inglés. I couldn't believe I had so much to talk about. I really don't. I can't understand how they can stand me for 5 years, but they did.
Same group of people, or mainly the same people coming every week?
It's really nice because there can be maybe 50 people there, 40, 30, depending on the days.
Right.
And the whole group, some of them are new, and some of them have been following the talks for 5 years, which is amazing.
It is amazing.
And it's very nice because I can ask the public, what would you like to talk about next time? And I talk about it, but people participate, and sometimes we don't agree. And sometimes we do.
That's fun, though.
And it's fantastic because it should be open, it should be dialogue, it shouldn't be somebody telling people how things are. I'm very lucky to be in contact with this large group of people, very diverse. I would say that most people are interested in psychology, so they know about how they feel, they're interested in culture, they're interested in philosophy, they're interested in self-improvement. And so it's a fantastic pulse of what society is going through. I'm taking the pulse of society through this group. and they're enjoying themselves too. We have a good time. We laugh a lot.
I can imagine anybody who hangs out with you is going to laugh a lot. But I know that you like to talk about relationship issues, and I'm sure that these come into play at these meetings. The Ambito cultural. Is it free of charge for people who want to go?
It's free of charge, and not only free of charge, they offer us a drink afterwards, so we can all hang around and chat. It's really nice, yeah.
It sounds like it would be a good template or a good setup for like a singles night kind of thing, don't you?
Well, if they organized it that way, it's actually in El Corte Inglés in Serrano, that used to be Marks and Spencer's. On the 7th floor, there's a cafeteria that switches into a conference room with large screens, and the whole building sees who's talking upstairs.
Really?
So yeah, it's really nice.
So when you guys are up on the 7th floor, people in the
bookshop can see you talking, and so it's an open space. People come and go, and they stay for as long as they like, and then we all have a drink together and talk about things in a more informal fashion, because of course my job is to tell people what has been investigated and what we know through investigation and books and practice. And then we all talk and enjoy the theme.
Like what might a typical topic, or give me an idea of what one of your recent topics was?
For instance, this Thursday I'm going to talk about what obsessive compulsive people feel and how they think, and the whole spectrum from obsessive traits, which could be just wanting to have your file of facts in order, to obsessive compulsive problems. And one of those ideas that is really interesting, that sometimes people have an obsessive thought, which is very disturbing.
I've never had an obsessive thought.
It's terribly disturbing. It's horrible. Can you imagine that one day you're sitting in your house and you think, what if? What if I left the car open and the brakes off? Or what if one of my children became terribly sick? Or what if somebody died of this or that disease because I left something open at the lab? These things.
So worry about things that probably are not going to happen.
And also that are probably out of your control.
Right.
And that you can't check all the time because things do happen in life.
Right.
And all of these things, I'm very interested in trying to make psychological culture as popular and handy and common as medical culture is nowadays, because we all know what to do. If we cut our finger, we know we have to disinfect it. We know we have to wash our hands. We know we have to eat 5 units of vegetables and fruit a day. This is basic health, physical health.
Right.
We all know we have to exercise. But most people don't know basic psychology, and they don't know that an obsessive trait is not the same as obsessive compulsive behavior. And when somebody gets an obsessive idea, they can be terrified for months. They can even start drinking and turn that into something horrifying, and they hide it.
So that's what happened to me.
Ah!
Well, I mean, you bring up a good point, though, in that if somebody cuts their finger, they don't think twice about going to the doctor if it's a bad cut.
That's it.
They don't think, oh, should I go or shouldn't I go? But if somebody's having a mental issue, like an obsessive-compulsive thought that's affecting their life in a negative way, sometimes people are afraid to go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist.
Well, I'll tell you. Once I had a very interesting situation. I was in Llanes, Asturias, in the north of Spain, and suddenly I see on the beach, this is a beach called Toro. It's beautiful. It's got these volcanic rocks all around the beach. So you see part of the beach, but not all of it. And it wasn't very warm. It wasn't the summer season. It must have been autumn or spring or something. So there I am, walking towards the beach and walking away from it, and I see Lord Byron dead on the beach. I go, oh my God, the psychologist has lost her mind. You'll have to retire. Well, I was very concerned about this for a while, and I thought, well, it doesn't fit in my temperament. I mean, I haven't seen anything bizarre before, and I didn't see anything after that. And then this is one of those things that I did think, am I losing it?
Maybe you need to see someone.
In my profession, you see somebody all the time because you psychoanalyze. And so my therapist said, oh, don't bother. It doesn't fit into anything delusional at all, so just drop it. Don't think about it. Don't worry about it. That winter, I went to the cinema and I watched a movie called Remando al Viento. It's about the Bronte sisters. It had been recorded on that beach, and what I had seen was in the movie. I hadn't seen the set because it was behind the rocks, but I actually saw Lord Byron dead on the beach.
Oh.
So I realized I'm not mad. Thank God.
You mean you saw an actor who was portraying Lord Byron?
Exactly.
And Lord Byron died in Greece, did he not? Okay, so you thought you were going a little bit crazy.
I thought maybe I've seen something that wasn't there. And I do doubt myself because you ought to in my profession. You really ought to.
Yeah, and don't they say that people who are psychologists, psychiatrists, that they should be in therapy themselves?
Yes, that's what we do for many years.
Yeah.
And so what happened is that I saw this and I did doubt myself, which is what I'm supposed to do.
I think that's a pretty realistic movie set.
Yes, and it was amazing because I saw it there. And then it said in the credits, this was recorded on Toro Beach in Llanes, Asturias. There you are. I haven't lost it completely.
And then you were cured. You're
yes.
like, yes, I am all better now.
But in another context, somebody might keep this quiet forever and think they had a hallucination and feel frightened and feel crazy.
Like something's wrong with them.
Exactly. Yeah. And not only that, issues that have to do with self-confidence, with relationships, with self-esteem, with panic, with anxiety, with creativity. How much better can one be? These are some of the things that I really want to help divulge and help people get familiar with. Because as we were saying, comfort zone is an English expression. And in different cultures, yes, and in different contexts and cultures, some themes are much more popular than others. And I find it very useful to talk about psychology and make it as much of a matter-of-fact family conversation as possible. The same as washing our hands and curing our cuts with disinfectant is now very normal and popular, and it wasn't normal in the 1900s. It wasn't heard of.
No. Well, when did Freud live? In the at
the turn of the century. But we've advanced far beyond Freud nowadays. Yeah. He was very interesting and incredibly useful and opened up the whole mind of Europe to the mind and to the unconscious.
I mean, even though some of his theories and his thoughts have been proven to be maybe wrong, he still sort of paved the way for the modern notion of psychotherapy.
Very much so.
Yeah. I was in therapy for 2 years. I liked it a lot.
Good.
It like you said, it kind of helped me open up some creativity, get rid of some issues or sort of handle some issues that I was dealing with. But I felt that the positive thing was more that I felt more relaxed and I felt like I could be myself and I didn't have to be such a performer all the time.
That's the whole thing, that sometimes we have a sort of a crust, which is the performing self that we can present in public. Yeah. And then there's an enormous amount of ourselves, a bit like in an iceberg, which is underwater, which we don't show usually. And it's very frightening if you don't know that part of yourself. Because then things happen. You feel things, you do things, you think things, you behave in a certain way, and you feel it's very out of control, and especially it's very alien. It's very strange. And
so
that's
you might be feeling something
I don't think is good to live with.
Well, it's like you're only using part. You know, they say you only use part of your brain. Researchers have now discovered that we're using a lot more of our brain than originally thought. But if you're a person who needs to be a creative for your work or just to have a better relationship with your loved one, if you don't explore the stuff that's under the water, then it would be kind of upsetting if you didn't know how to deal with it.
Exactly.
I want to come and see you.
Oh, great.
I actually thought about it a couple times.
You did.
After you were on with me in the last season, I had a couple periods in those years where things weren't quite so well for me mentally. And I thought, well, maybe I can call Vivienne and I can see if I might need to go into therapy.
It's a lot like what we're doing now. It's not bizarre. I don't lie people down on couches like in the Woody Allen movies. We just talk.
I feel better already. I feel like in this 25 minutes, I feel mentally more calm, and I feel like I would like to see you more often. So maybe I'll come to one of those Ambito Cultural talks.
It would be lovely having you there.
I'd like to see you in action. You've seen me do what I do. I want to see you do what you do.
Fabulous.
Vivienne, thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you very much. I hope to see you again.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I always learn something new.
Thank you. Same to you.
If I have a third season, you'll have to come back for that.
Thank you. I'd be delighted to.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Well, we've come to the end of another episode of My Living Room. Thank you for tuning in and hopefully enjoying my talk with Vivienne. We'll be back with a new episode for you very soon. So, adios. Bye-bye.